Is the tragedy of Macbeth a true story? No. But it does hold very strong ties to real historical events and real people. Most importantly, the characters that we see in the play, King Duncan and Macbeth, were real figures in history. So let's take a look at a few of the similarities and differences between the real history of Macbeth and the tragedy of Macbeth. Firstly, this particular production of Macbeth here at the Almeida Theatre is set in the ambiguous future, whereas the original Macbeth, which was written in the 17th century, was set in the 11th century. 600 years before Shakespeare was writing. Scholars agree that Shakespeare's main source of inspiration for Macbeth was a series of books known as Hollingshead Chronicles, which was a large collaborative publication of several volumes completed in 1577, which documents the history of England, Ireland and Scotland from their first inhabitants right up until the 1500s. As well as Macbeth, Hollingshead Chronicles is considered by historians to be the primary source for other Shakespeare plays, including King Lear and Richard III. In the Chronicles, we are told of King Duncan's rule and of Macbeth's slaying of the king. So, yes, the fundamental story of Shakespeare's tragedy is true, but it's still heavily fictionalised. First of all, let's look at how these real historical figures differed from Shakespeare's portrayal of them. The real King Duncan, Duncan I of Scotland, reigned from 1034 until his death in 1040, being 33 when he became king and dying at the age of 39, making him considerably young, or at least far younger than he is made out to be in Shakespeare's play. In the Chronicles, he is noted for his weak character and poor leadership skills, which obviously contrasts to the virtuous, noble, loved king that we see in the tragedy. When it comes to Macbeth, unlike Shakespeare's fictional Macbeth, the real Macbeth, which means son of life in Gaelic, had a very legitimate, very respectable claim to the throne. This Macbeth was known for his strong leadership qualities, unlike the fictional Macbeth, who is heavily influenced by what others tell him to do. As I said before, Duncan I does die at the hands of Macbeth, at least at the hands of his men, but this was in battle rather than being a targeted attack while the king slept. Death in battle was an honourable way to be killed at the time, and a perfectly reasonable way for Macbeth to ascend to the throne, given the societal norms of medieval Scotland. When he did become king, he ruled successfully for 17 years. Macbeth brought peace to Scotland during a time of violent upheaval. He was a popular ruler and the first Scottish king ever recorded to make a pilgrimage to Rome. In the play, Macbeth is beheaded by Macduff, whereas the real Macbeth was killed in battle by Malcolm, the son of the dead King Duncan. A year later, Malcolm became King Malcolm III. Lady Macbeth is scarcely mentioned in Hollingshead's Chronicles, but there are other historical sources that document the life of the real Lady Macbeth. Her name was Gruach. Widowed in 1032, she married Macbeth the year later, and when he became king, she became his queen. The two had no children together, but she had a son named Lulach from a previous marriage, which Macbeth accepted as his heir. When Macbeth died, Lulach became king, but he was weak and young, and the following year, Malcolm III seized power. Accounts over the years have said that when Macbeth died, Lady Macbeth killed herself, but there's no evidence to support this. In fact, little is known of what happened for the remainder of Gruach's life. So, what was Shakespeare's reasoning for changing the characteristics of these historical figures? And how did the historical context during which he was writing affect how he decided to alter the real story of Macbeth? It is widely agreed that Shakespeare wrote Macbeth in 1606. The beginning of the 17th century saw the reign of James VI and I. He was given the two titles because he was the first king to rule over both Scotland as James VI and England as James I. The son of Mary Queen of Scots, James VI and I ascended to the throne after the death of the childless Queen Elizabeth I, signifying the end of the Tudor dynasty and the beginning of the Stuart period. There are many signs that indicate that Macbeth was heavily written with the king in mind. Firstly, King James was the patron for Shakespeare's acting company, known as the King's Men. The fact that this play was written in order to appeal to the king explains why the characters of King Duncan and Macbeth were altered, to make the king the noble and wise and virtuous one, and to make the character who killed the king and took the throne for himself the scheming and deceitful and guilt-ridden character. The themes of betrayal and assassination were topics that would have heavily played on the king's mind. There were many attempts to take the king's life throughout his reign, most notably the Gunpowder Plot of 1605. After this, King James was known to be very insecure and anxious and constantly on edge over the threat of assassination. Therefore, to end the play where justice is met and the character that killed the king meets his fate was an ending that would have much better pleased him. Finally, the addition of the three witches would have added to the entertainment of the play, but also appealed to the king, who had an interest in the supernatural and witchcraft. In 1597, he had written a book named Daimonology, on the occult and black magic and its dangers to society. Some of the magical language and the spells that the witches use is directly taken from this book, a nod to the king which would have no doubt pleased him when watching. So there we have it. A little bit of an insight into the historical accuracy of Macbeth, the sources that inspired Shakespeare to write it, and the historical context of the time that it was created. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed.